Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Luazi. My friends call me Luaz, and on this channel we discuss faith, motivation, and empowerment. Today I want to talk about how to deal with a micromanager in the workplace. Stay tuned. So basically, when I was in my articles, I mostly had really good relationships. What I found is that I quite enjoy being around people. My favorite part of auditing was working in small teams. I loved the fact that we were all in the same stage of life. We were all young, we were all eager and hungry. And even though auditing had its frustrations, and even though the environment could sometimes feel really toxic, and even though there were times where we felt like we were being exploited as like cheap young labor, one thing that I always appreciated in audits was the camaraderie. I loved working in small teams of 4 or 5. And a lot of the time, the best audits were spent just laughing and chatting. And for the most part, I got along well with my managers. Didn't interact that much with most of the partners, but I mostly had really good working relationships with the managers and my team members, except one. In my first year and in my final year, I worked with this one manager who was very much a micromanager. What is a micromanager? Somebody who is unable to delegate. A micromanager is somebody who has to be, for example, CC'd on every email. They have to know where you are. If you're not at your desk, they need to know where you are. Basically, they don't allow their staff members to have much freedom or autonomy. So that's what a micromanager is. If you just want to share my experience of dealing with a micromanager, and I was very young. I was in my 20s. It was my first job. I took it very seriously. I was very young and very ambitious, and it was quite difficult for me to deal with a micromanager. It created a lot of pressure for me. So I want to give you guys some advice on how to handle dealing with a micromanager boss. So one of the things that I dealt with the person that I was working with was he would require us to give him multiple updates in a day. So what he would do is he would call in, would have a meeting in the morning, which is fine. It's a catch up. It's the morning. It sets the tone for the day. What are the priorities for the day? That's perfectly fine. When you're working in a deadline environment, that's actually quite helpful when your manager checks in and makes himself or herself available to you. And so we would have to have a check-in in the morning. Then we would have to have a check-in in the afternoon. Then at the end of the day, we'd have to give him like an update. The problem here was these multiple updates would create a lot of time pressure. So in audits, you had to do your timesheet weekly, which meant you had to keep like a schedule of your work log daily. That was quite time consuming. That could take 20 to 30 minutes. You had to manage your meetings for the day with the clients. You had to manage, your workload, making sure that you finished all the sections that were assigned to you. And then in between that, you're updating your manager 3 times a day, and each update takes 15 to 30 minutes, each update. So an hour and a half is spent updating your manager. 30 minutes is spent doing your timesheet daily, 20 to 30 minutes doing your timesheet daily. So you're spending 2 hours on admin. An hour and a half updating your manager on your work, especially when it's not an overtime client, especially when it's not a group audit, especially when it's not a highly pressurized audit. It was just so unnecessary. So that was issue number 1. Issue number 2 is he wanted to be CC'd on every email, and he would respond to every email you sent to a client. So for example, I once sent an email to a client saying, requesting something. 20 seconds later, he sent me an email saying, go to the client, don't just send an email. And I'm thinking, I'm in my 3rd year, I'm not an idiot. I sent an email to keep track of the record, to keep a record of the fact that I requested information. After sending an email, I go to the client and I say, hey, I sent you an email asking for something. And even then, you send an email, you give it about 15 minutes, then you go to the client and say, hey, 15 minutes ago I sent you an email, have a look at it when you get a chance, blah, blah, blah. So how did I deal with this? Honestly, not very well. At the time, I took it very personally. I thought that he was monitoring me because he thought I wasn't competent. It made me really stressed out. And it made me really resentful towards him. Sometimes there was a lot of tension when we spoke to each other. But as time went on, I recognized that this was just standard practice for him. I also heard from, water cooler conversation that many other people had this type of problem with him. I heard through the grapevine that he would shout at people over the phone. So I started to realize that this isn't personal. So one thing I would say is don't take it personally. observe that this person has their own insecurities that's making them a micromanager. And instead of taking it personally, try to think, how can you alleviate the pressures that they're facing? Because when a person is a micromanager, they're dealing with a lot of stress themselves. Try to understand, what are they worried about? What are their triggers? Are they worried that you're not going to make the deadline? Then maybe showing them on a daily basis how you guys are on track will alleviate their stress, but within reason, So tell them, look, 3 times a day of updates is actually quite time consuming and we're on a tight deadline. So be objective with the information you present them. So I didn't go to my boss and say, you're a micromanager. I knew that wasn't going to fly. Instead, I kept a record of how his micromanaging affected me and my ability to be productive time-wise. So I actually made a note of how many times a day he wanted updates and how long it took. And I presented that to him to say, hey, it takes 2 hours. We give you 2 hours worth of updates. And this is actually one of the easier audits. So I don't think that it's justifiable. It's actually taking up a lot of time. It's very time consuming. Another thing that you could do, so you could find ways to kind of make them understand that their micromanaging is actually having a direct impact on your productivity. That way it's objective, you're not insulting them, and you're also coming with a solution to say, I'm as concerned about the deadline as you, and so let's do this more efficiently. Have an ally. So I had a mentor that I really got along well with, and I was able to confide in her that I found my manager quite stressful. And, she was very honest with me. She said, you're not going to work with people you like all the time. It's not always going to be peaches and cream. Sometimes you're going to work with somebody's personality clashes with yours entirely. And that gave me some perspective, and it made me feel less afraid, because when your manager is micromanaging you and it's somebody who has the power to rate you, you feel quite hopeless. You feel like you're almost at the mercy of the situation. You're scared to speak up because you think it's going to count against you. But the pressure they're putting on you is really affecting your performance, and they don't realize it. And having an ally, having a mentor to confide in and it gave me some perspective, and it made me feel like I have someone in my corner who, if push came to shove, would kind of back me up on the fact that I've generally performed really well with other managers, and me and him are just having some type of clash in our working styles. Micromanagers have their own stuff that they're dealing with. I don't advise that you go and tell the person you're a micromanager. I think that's a bit rude. It can come across as rude. Keep it objective. Don't criticize them as a person or their management style. Keep it objective by highlighting how their style of managing is impeding your ability to be productive. So that's my advice. Thank you for watching, and stay blessed.